are watching the Jennylyn Show, and I'm Jennylyn Cleve, your host. And today, my guest is the mayor of Menlo Park, Mr. Ray Mueller. Thank you for coming to my show.
Thank you for having me.
I have been doing this show mostly to encourage young people that, regardless of their socioeconomic backgrounds, they can choose the best life. And I believe that I need to start with the mayors of the various cities amongst the others that I've interviewed, because it takes a lot of responsibility to be the mayor of a city. And you're probably the youngest mayor I've ever interviewed. So I'd just like you to share a little bit about yourself with me in terms of where you're from and a little bit about your childhood. So why don't you choose where you want to begin?
Okay. So where I'm from, I grew up down in Southern California in a town called Vista, which is San Diego, North County. And my childhood was interesting. I was part of a very large family, 5 brothers and 1 sister. And I was near the bottom. I was what I would call the oldest of the second litter. I was the oldest. There was 3 older children and then a big space, and my older brother Michael. And then 5 years, and then I came along and my 2 little brothers. When I was born into a family that was pretty well off to begin with. My dad was a dentist, had served in the U.S. Army, and he had married his high school sweetheart, and they were doing quite well. And about the time I was in 1st grade, my dad became disabled.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, he developed degenerative disc disease in his back and could no longer work. And at that time, all of my siblings and I still lived in the family home. And it was a very interesting time in our house. I remember it distinctly. My mom was high school educated, but had not worked for some time. And she ended up having to go back and improve her education and go back to work. And I love those memories. I love that house. It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house that we all packed into. And just lots of memories from that.
Do you still have the house in your family?
No, they sold it. So it's an interesting story. My dad, the way my dad coped with that was there was about 3 hours a day that he could be out of the family home and not in pain. So he ended up really, and it's where I think my passion for public service came. He ended up spending those 3 hours actually in ministry, going out into the community and helping people. And so if I wanted to be with my dad, my brothers and I, if we wanted to be with him, we would be out with him. And so it was funny. I didn't have a dad who played baseball with us. I didn't have a dad who did soccer or did physical things. If we did physical things with him, we were out serving in the community. And the interesting thing about this story is my dad never gave up on the fact that someday there might be a cure for his condition. So during that entire time period, he kept up his continuing education. About the time that I left for college, a surgery had been perfected where they could go ahead and work on his condition. And he ended up actually having that surgery. And it was very odd for me when in my sophomore year of college, he ended up having that surgery and going back to work as a dentist.
I love these stories.
Yeah,
I do.
Yeah, and they ended up selling that house shortly thereafter. But tons of great memories in that house. My sister, one of the distinct memories I have of that house is my sister got married very young, and her family came to live with us. And one of my brothers got married very young, and he came to live with us. So we had all of these people living in this 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, and I had 3 brothers living in a garage that had been converted into 3 rooms, and I shared a room with 3 brothers. And I remember setting up a tent in our living room so I could just have some space without visual distractions to study. And
what was the ratio of boys to girls?
Oh man, well, there was a lot of boys. My sister, when she lived with us, had 3 little boys pretty quickly. And then there were, 5 brothers. So there was a lot of boys in the house, a lot of wrestling and good times.
I think it's great. I love family stories like that. I mean, it really gives a definition to family.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so you grew up in San Diego in this family with all these boys.
Uh-huh.
Tell us how you got to Menlo Park to where you're the mayor now.
Yeah, so I ended up in high school. Um, Things went pretty well. I ended up applying to UC Berkeley and was accepted. And I studied there for 4 years. I ended up my high school sweetheart is my wife now.
Awesome.
Yeah, she ended up a year behind me at Cal and attended there as well. And then I ended up going to law school at UC Hastings. And I would say initially my wife fell in love with the Bay Area more than I. I was more of a Southern California beach pool type of person, but there was something about, especially when we got onto the peninsula, the passion and the energy and the creativity here is really unique. There's nowhere else in the world like it, and I should say we fell in love with this area, and we plan to be here forever.
You do?
Yeah, we don't plan on moving.
Awesome. So how long have you lived here?
We've lived on the peninsula now for 8 years.
8 years. Do you get back to San Diego often?
Not as much anymore now that I'm mayor. It was funny, my wife and my children were just down there a couple of weeks ago visiting family. But I usually get down there about twice a year now.
So why did you decide that you wanted to run for the mayor, and that's led you to where you sit now?
Wow, there's lots of reasons. So it's funny, initially, the way I got involved in in public office and public service in Menlo Park was, it was around the time of the last recession, and I was practicing law in San Francisco, and the recession started to happen. We had just bought a condo here in Menlo Park, and we're doing pretty well. My wife's a middle school counselor in Portola Valley, and it shook me up. The start of the recession really scared me, and I wasn't really sure what to do to protect my family. I had a newborn son, and we had worked really hard to get here. And so I went to my wife's grandfather, actually, who had been like a grandfather to me.
Right.
He had been a Bataan Death March survivor, had gone through the Great Depression, had all of these things happen to him during his life. And I went to him and I said, Woody, what's the one thing that I can do to protect my family in this? Well, so that I don't, so that we make it. And he looked at me, and I'll never forget what he said. He said, Ray, it doesn't matter what you're going to do, you're going to lose it all. And it wasn't what I was expecting to hear.
Of course, it doesn't sound very optimistic.
No, but the lesson that came afterwards actually really changed things for me, because he said, look, in my life, I lost it all when the Depression happened. I had to leave my family. It happened when I went to war, and I had to leave my sweetheart, and then I was in the death camp, and it happened, all the way along. There was all these things that happened, and every single time I lost it all. But and it happened again near the end of his life. He had just lost his wife, Eva, and he said, but the one thing that I've learned through life is that you're going to lose it all, but you can always rebuild if you build the right habits and you have the right priorities. And it really that example really freed things up for me. So I started looking at my life at that point and what I was doing, where my priorities were. And instead of diving in and really gripping the steering wheel hard, I actually let go a little bit and said, well, if that's the case, what will my life be? And at that point, there was an opening on the Transportation Commission here in Menlo Park.
Yeah.
Applied for it, started to get to know people in town, and started to really enjoy being a part of the community. And there are lots of problems and interesting challenges to solve. And the more I dived in, the more that passion I had as a youth with my father serving the community really started to come out. And I realized this is what makes me happy.
That is so awesome. And that's why I do these interviews, because I'm listening to you, and basically you said something, I think, which is phenomenal, and so many people are oblivious to. And I think I heard you say is, I let go. And what I got from what you said was, you started to enjoy your life.
Mm-hmm.
You started to go with the flow. And with a goal in sight, right? Am
Absolutely.
I correct?
No, absolutely. It's funny. It's that expression. I use it purposely. I let go of the steering wheel a little bit, because there's this expression in Formula One racing where a driver knows they're in trouble when they're starting to really grip the steering wheel hard. That's when they're
Right.
going to crash into the wall. And you have to let go sometimes and let life come to you and enjoy it.
Yes, and that's how I feel about life. And I know that I have many friends, and some very close to me, who live as though life is eternal.
Mm-hmm.
And all they care about is making money. And I watch them just stressing, 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 and no fun. And they've lost the things they love
Mm-hmm.
because their focus was making money. And so I think it's great to hear you say this, that you just have to have balance, right?
Right, absolutely. And I could say, it's funny. In my role as mayor in Menlo Park, I've met many entrepreneurs and really successful people in all walks of life. And the one thing I'd say is the ones who are most successful aren't worried about the money.
Mm-hmm.
They're passionate about what they're doing and they're creative and they want to be surrounded by smart and creative people who don't get caught up in, don't get me wrong, of course, in terms of, the bottom line, they want to have successful results, but in the day-to-day that drives them, their mission, it's not to make money, it's to create.
Mm-hmm. I know people who've thrown away beautiful opportunities and people in their life because they chose the money.
Right.
But it's everybody's prerogative to prioritize how they choose to.
Right.
But it's good to hear from someone as successful as you that you didn't just focus on making money, but you had that goal, you had a goal in mind,
Mm-hmm.
and you stayed true to the course. So tell me what you have found the most challenging in this office as being the mayor of a city like this.
Yeah, and I don't mean to be wordy about it. It's interesting. I've grown as a mayor and as a person in this office because in this city we have such an educated public and everybody has an opinion. I like to say in Menlo Park everybody has an opinion except the candidate for office. and 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 because of that, everybody is always engaged. And if you let your ego get in the way, it would be very easy not to interact with the public and try to protect what you're doing and be worried about criticism. And I've really tried to be the opposite of that. But that's a challenge as a leader, is to be able to take all of these varying ideas and these incredible points of views, and then how do you go ahead and coalesce that into a mission that serves everyone in the public, right? And that's really the challenge day to day, is knowing what the overall goal of the mission is,
Mm-hmm.
and then coalescing everyone's ideas. And there are going to be times that people don't agree, but making sure that everybody understands, even if I don't agree with you, I value you as part of the conversation.
Right.
So,
And that takes a big person to be able to do that.
well, like I said, we all grow into our roles. Every day I try to make sure that I reach. It's funny, you get emails sometimes from people, and don't get me wrong, there are lots of wonderful people who give me great affirmations, but I get emails from residents who are upset. And I try to make a point of always calling back every single one of them and listening to them and talking with them about where they're coming from, and really try to figure out, is there something on the other side of the coin that I'm missing? And I think we do a pretty good job of that here.
Thank you. So from where you sit, what do you see happening for young people in this community in the future?
So there are a lot of challenges for young people in our community. I'm acutely aware of that here in the Valley. Coming out of college now is so different than it was for me coming out of college,
right.
20 years ago. There is the cost of living has risen dramatically. Housing costs are just incredibly higher. The type of job opportunities available to a recent college graduate are I would say not the same type of opportunities that I had. They have much greater debt than I had to face.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, on the flip side of that, there is such wonderful opportunity with all of the knowledge that is here. And I would say to a person, as a young person, this is where I would want to be, and I would try to surround myself. It's funny, you start to realize in your 30s you want to surround yourself with the right people.
Mm-hmm. It's very important.
Yeah, and it's not because, and it's not, sometimes when you're young you think, well, it's because who you know. Well, it's not because of who they are. It's necessarily that somehow lifts your profile, but it's because of the value of their advice and the positive nature of their perspective. And there's this great saying, and it's especially true now when I look back on my life as a youngster. I was lucky to have really good friends, and it wasn't just because they were great friends, it's because I had a great board of directors. I had lots of valuable advice all the time coming to me to help me make great judgments. And so as a young person here, I would say to people here, it's worth it. Stay here, be engaged, because we need your perspective, and get involved in civic affairs. So oftentimes people like to point at what's happening at the federal level somewhere in Washington, D.C. The more I've gotten involved in local service, the more I realize that there are so many things happening here locally that affect what the future is for people here locally. And some of our brightest shining stars are our youngest stars, bringing that new perspective of what's needed.
Well, I think that so many people just don't want to get involved in the political arena because it can be so controversial, and you know that you can't please everybody. And when you're in an office like this, everyone is looking to you to meet whatever demands, requests, expectations that they may have. If your son decided one day when he's grown up to do what you are doing, what would your advice be to him?
My advice to my son, if he was going to go into this,
To the political arena.
yeah, I would think it would be about how he measures success.
Why?
Because so many people measure success in public service as whether you're reelected or how popular you are at the time, or are people saying nice things about you all the time? And that's not really success in public service. It's funny, and especially here in the Silicon Valley, one of the reasons why I love it here is because we have a different definition of failure. In the Valley, you can, unlike other places in the country, you can fail. And as long as you show great effort and that you've shown great promise and you've worked really hard, people love those experiences and you can rebuild.
Right.
And the same thing has to do with what I would say to my son, is if you keep your priorities right, if you always explain to people where you're coming from, and you're not worried about them judging you, but you're engaged intellectually with them, and you value success in that manner, in that fashion, that you're moving toward your goals and you're communicating that effectively, it'll always turn around. You'll be fine. But the worst thing that could happen to him if he were in my shoes was that he had the opportunity that I had, and he wasted it worrying about public opinion. So if my dad wasn't working, couldn't play baseball or anything like that with me, and on top of it, the hours he was outside of the house he was administered, I got bullied a little bit growing up, and I learned at a real young age that bullies will be bullies, but the success in my life isn't how they value me.
And that's how you beat them, becoming successful.
Right, absolutely. I mean, a bully will always be a bully, and God knows in politics there are bullies, but the way that you overcome them is you smile at them, you say thank you, and you keep moving forward.
They're everywhere, trust you. So I read that you made a difference in the East Palo Alto School District. Tell me what you did.
Well, there's a lot of people making a difference in the school district. I think probably what you're referring to is that this year we started a program where we invited local public servants to teach a class at the local Boys and Girls Club.
Okay.
And so we had all of the mayors come in. We had the mayors and different city council members were invited to teach. I think it ended up being an 8-week class to really get to know the students there in East Palo Alto and in Menlo Park, and to really try to understand what were the challenges that they were facing.
Right.
And then also very frankly, to inspire them, to let them know that we value where they're coming from. it was an incredibly useful class for me at the time, because we were dealing with a lot of public safety issues in East Palo Alto, East Palo Alto and Menlo Park at the time. And then I also have done a lot of work. Actually, I actually have done worked pretty closely with the Ravenswood School District as new superintendent to try to see what we can do there to help them with their facilities improvements. The night I was sworn into office here in Menlo Park, there was a drive-by shooting in Menlo Park.
I think I remember that.
Yeah, well, it wasn't that night, but the night I was sworn off, there had been a number of drive-by shootings in a few weeks preceding. And so the night I was sworn in, I made a commitment that if my kids could go to school every day and didn't have to worry about those issues, that the children in Menlo Park, in our Belhaven community, shouldn't have to worry about them either. So I'm really proud of the fact that we've started these educational programs, these leadership programs. We've opened a new police station now. We've put in crime safety cameras, but we've also protected people's rights to privacy with the only statute that exists in the state of California that monitors how long that you can, I shouldn't say statute's an ordinance, but how long you can keep people's privacy information that would be captured on those license plate readers and cameras. And so we've done a lot, frankly, to try to address this issue, but there's a lot more we can do.
Yeah, I was surprised when I heard about the drive-by shooting in Menlo Park, because it's probably the one city that if it had happened before, I was oblivious. But when I heard that, I thought, Menlo Park? It was just the last city I thought I'd hear that happening. So I'm happy that you've made a change, because I haven't heard anything recently, anymore. Even East Palo Alto has cleaned up quite a bit in terms of things you used to hear reported on the news.
Well, so it's an ongoing process. But we're working. Our police department's working close together with their police department. I can tell you that the other thing we did was we said that after we put in this new police station and after we put in the crime cameras, and we have a new public safety truancy officer, and I have to say, for all those things, Facebook was very helpful in helping us address. But we said that
Thank you, Facebook.
Yeah, I said the next thing the next thing we wanted to do is really start to get the community organized into neighborhood watch programs, and that's happening now too. And it's really about community empowerment. One of the things that we discovered through this process is that a lot of the crime actually wasn't being generated from internally in Menlo Park. There were people coming from across the bay.
Okay.
And we had some problem tenants in Menlo Park, some long-time standing problems, and once we identified that, we got rid of them. So
that's great. Congratulations.
No, thank you. The chief went out identified the problems, the long-standing problems, and we got in touch with some landlords and figured out that there was a way to have those people not live in our city anymore. And so, and very frankly, I don't feel bad about that 1 minute, because I know when kids go to school now who live near those homes, they're that much safer.
Yeah, and that's so important.
Right.
So, whenever I do these interviews, when I'm getting all this great information and getting to know somebody's fascinating story, the time flies. Mm-hmm. We're almost out of time, but before we go, what would you like to say to young boys and girls who are less privileged, maybe because both of their parents have to go to work and they don't have the privilege of your children and that my children had? What would you say to them if they were watching this?
So what I would say to them is, growing up, I grew up in a family where my dad couldn't work and my mom worked like crazy. And there was far too many of us probably living in one house. And the way that my parents, what they really emphasized to us was to love each other and to study hard. And that was really, because we loved each other and we kept close watch on each other, there were a lot of us to do that. And because we studied hard, and we worked really hard, all of my brothers and my sister, we all did well. And I can't emphasize enough to youth today that life is very long, but the education that you get is something that will go along with you for the entire ride. Mm-hmm. And So surround yourself with people who love you. Even if your parents can't be there, find people who have the right priorities, who are going to look out for you, who are going to give you the right advice. Stick with those people. And if they start to wander off, you don't have to follow them. Keep those priorities in check and study as hard as you can. And that's one of the wonderful things about our culture, is that if you do those things, your future's bright.
That's right. I agree. And education is so important.
It's huge.
But I must ask you this question that occurred to me while you were speaking. And I'm curious, if your father hadn't become ill, let's say he continued to be a successful dentist, do you think you kids would have all turned out just the same?
We would not have been the same. No. My perspective on life is much different because of what we came through as a family. When I grew up and I wanted to be with my dad, he couldn't do physical things with me, but he was focused on my mental and spiritual side. So I'd be with him, and I'd go into if I wanted to be with him, we'd be sitting in his bed watching the McNair report and the PBS, NewsHour, and talking about the world and the way things were and the way things should be. I don't think I would have had those conversations with my dad, because I think he probably would have been at work. And I don't think I would have appreciated how my mom was a tiger. I mean, my mom held our family together. I mean, she held our family together, held him together emotionally, and we all made it. And when you look at my brothers, I have two brothers who work in school districts as administrators. I have a brother who's just made a colonel in the Army. One's a minister, one's a CFO. I mean, they've all done...
Congratulations.
Yeah, no, my sister and her husband have done incredibly well. And that is a tribute to...
your parents.
My parents, yeah, no doubt. And the goal and the values they raised us with.
Well, I think there's a lot to be said for that, and I'm very proud of you kids. I think that you've obviously done very well with your job, and I'm assuming with the parent as you and your wife, your children are going to do equally well. But I had to ask you that question because so many times when children have things just handed to them, they know that their future is sealed because the parents has afforded them everything and will afford everything they need. They're not as driven. And that's why I asked if your father hadn't become ill and your family hadn't struggled, if you thought you would have been as successful as you have been.
It's funny. I know people who've come from very affluent backgrounds, and they've done great, and they're wonderful people. And they are just as... they contribute just as much to the world as I.
Yeah.
And more so in many cases. But I definitely wouldn't have the same values that I have.
There's a large percentage that don't because there's nothing to motivate them.
Yeah.
And I know some of them, but the world is made up of all types. I thank you so very much for sharing your life, your childhood, and your life as a mayor with me. And I hope that everybody watching this interview will learn something from you, something that will inspire them to make changes if they feel like they're not on the right track, but especially for kids, that they will see all it takes, like you say, is hard work and to get yourself a good education and be your best person. But most of all, congratulations to your father and your mother, because apart from being the professionals that they were, he was spiritual, and that's important to me.
Yeah,
I think it plays a big part in everything that we become in life. Yeah.
My mom took responsibility for our family and held us together.
Well, it was a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for your time. And I am really grateful to get to know you and what drives you. And thank you for doing such a great job with this city. So thank you for watching the Jennylyn Show. And hopefully you are going to learn once again from another inspiring person, something that you can take from his life and apply it to yours.